Hey everyone, and welcome back. So, Anthem, in some ways it's a strange game, but in other ways it is not. Live services are all the rage these days, so it's no surprise that EA wants a game like that of their own. Yet the studio working on this game, BioWare, are known for almost the opposite. They're known for narrative single-player role-playing games. So, therefore, Anthem, it occupies a bit of a strange place in the minds of consumers. At least that's my read on it. Even more so because for quite some time, we actually haven't really known a great deal about the game, how its, longer gameplay loops would really be. Well, the Anthem VIP demo has given us a glimpse at the game. It's let us get some hands-on time, but in EA fashion, it's a demo that may have done a bit more harm than good, because of course many will remember the Mass Effect Andromeda Origin Access demo stuff, and that essentially showed off one of the worst segments of the game, along with its most memeable sequences. Well, with Anthem, the problems have not been the same as for Mass Effect Andromeda, but it is another example of a premium demo that is a little bit troubled. We have seen numerous posts from BioWare about how it's actually a pretty old build that has been modified for the demo, and it does make you wonder why it's even out. Personally, I think that this VIP demo exists on mandate from EA to have pre-release content so that they can heavily push people towards Origin Access Premium, and that's their subscription service that gives you access to their games, usually like their most expensive edition of their games. Now, we recently saw this with Battlefield 5, which essentially had a tiered release date. So as we go into this, it's worth bearing in mind that I don't think BioWare wanted this demo to go out. I really don't. I think this demo exists by EA mandate to have Origin Access Premium seem more alluring, and I wonder if their broad goal to grow that service has came at the expense of Anthem starting off with a bit of a negative news cycle. Now, Anthem, of course, has been plagued with technical issues ranging from infinite loading screens to server disconnects to extremely poor performance across just about all devices, including the consoles, even the premium ones like the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. But that stuff aside, what about the actual game? Well, let's jump into it because I've been playing it. Anthem is going for a semi-post-apocalyptic frontier science fiction vibe. Most of the humans are in Fort Tarsus, which is this big city surrounded by danger, not too similar to the, too dissimilar to the setup of Destiny. And I know that's a comparison that likely frustrates the developers, but hey, it's pretty clear. So you start off in Fort Tarsus, and that serves as your main narrative hub. Now, the other narrative characters are there, as well as a number of important functions, like the Forge. So I think the first thing that struck me the most was how bad the navigation in Tarsus felt. You have a low field of view, first-person view that has pretty heavy head bob, and it's just a little bit unpleasant, and it's not helped by a walk speed that really reminds you of getting off the boat in Morrowind. So the next thing that hit me, which was actually a big surprise, was the dialogue. Initially it felt really bad, though the more I actually thought about it, the more that it struck me that this is just regular BioWare writing. There's something else here. So I listened again, and I think I found the problem, and that's the audio mixing. There were unnaturally long pauses between lines, especially responses, and the sound often feels a lot too clean. It's kind of like instead of mastering it with the room tone in mind, they kind of just slapped reverb on and called it a day, and that makes the dialogue feel quite uncomfortable and a little bit amateur. Over on Twitter, Patrick Beja described the effect quite well. He said that you could really tell they were recorded in different sessions. Now, of course, I mean, they all are, but that's, you feeling that is down to implementation that felt weak. Being a BioWare game, that is kind of just something I would have to take them up on. Anyway, so I made my way through Tarsus to the Forge, and that's what lets you customize your Javelin suit. So with my suit selected, I headed out into free play to get a bit more accustomed to the controls. And the first thing you notice is the visuals. The world is gorgeous. The proportions of the whole thing feel really alien. You're like this tiny fly in this kind of grand prehistoric feeling landscape. And the flying really did help out a lot there. Now, the mouse controls are very awkward. You should use a gamepad for the flying, ideally. But, once you get used to it, the flying's grand. Mechanically, it's not amazing, but just in terms of visuals and fantasy, they have essentially nailed that. The sound effects and the animations are all top-notch, and it just results in a very strong power fantasy. Now, the flight is not uncapped. You actually slowly do overheat, but this is something that you can mitigate by flying over water to cool down, with waterfalls actually removing your heat bar altogether. And all of these do combine to create a pretty simple and satisfying traversal system, but well, flying is, it's more than just a way to get around the place. It's also a part of combat. So let's just talk about combat generically first before we get into the various different Javelin suits. The first thing I notice is the gunplay. Of course, I was playing this with mouse and keyboard, especially for the shooting. And there's no sugarcoating this. It's average as hell. I mean, it's average to the point where it would have been passable years ago, but for today's market, it's just totally forgettable. The guns have no real sense of power behind them. From somebody who's just came from Destiny 2, it felt extremely jarring. Destiny, while it does have its issues, probably does have some of the best gunplay feedback in the industry with really great sound effects, strong handling characteristics, just a near flawless execution overall. It feels fantastic. With Anthem though, well, the guns just all feel very similar and boring, the sound effects are quite weak, and unlike in Destiny 2, the enemies are not fun to shoot. And that's a really big problem for this game, and I partially do think that it stems from the third-person camera. The weak point-based gameplay of the Destiny 2 enemies combined with their movement patterns and attacks makes them all feel very unique, kind of almost reminding you of, say, Doom, and that's a really strong thing, and it makes shooting them and fighting really fun and varied. But in Anthem, you just have these guns with really weak sound effects, really weak animations, of course, no doubt not helped by being in third person, and then enemies that just do feel like slightly too bullet spongy hitboxes by default. And the next sort of problem is flying. Flying somewhat removes geometry from the gameplay. Now, when the game gives you areas that are well designed for the flying combat with interesting geometry for flying, then it is quite good. But other times, the flying kind of just robs you of the ability to have level design to the point where the average combat in this, from what I have played, does not feel as good as Mass Effect Andromeda's combat, which in some ways is similar, but it's just more grounded. So yeah, the gunplay is below par, the flying is really cool sometimes in combat, but in other times it just makes the enemies not feel that interesting. Thankfully though, things do get a lot better when we talk about the Javelins. So the Javelins have a few different ability slots, and a decently wide selection of abilities, as well as slots you can socket in augmentations to. There are various ultimates, and there are 2 weapon slots, and this really is where Anthem starts to look a bit more just good again. So the Ranger Javelin is just a jack of all trades. Personally, I found it to be super boring. I don't really like slow characters in games, so I skipped out the more tanky Colossus, and I moved on to the Storm and the Interceptor. These both felt really great. I probably put the most time into the Storm. I went for its big shield spell, I went for an AoE fire spell, and then a rapid fire ice spell. And these all felt really satisfying to use, and interestingly, they almost felt ammo based. Like you'd actually regen 5 charges of them at a time, and this really does make the spellcasting feel like a far larger part of the gameplay, to the point where I really wasn't using my gun that much. So I'd say for me, the Storm was the most fun overall, and it was fun, raining down massive fire AoEs over loads of targets, and that was really great, and it was just core to me, or it felt like the spell stuff really is more the core of this game than the gunplay. The gunplay does feel like an aside once you start using the spells and abilities of your Javelins. I mean, yeah, on gunplay, something like Destiny or even Warframe clobbers Anthem, but ability-wise, I think Anthem doesn't clobber Destiny, but it does provide a decently different experience that I think many people will like, at least for the Storm, and then, of course, we next have the Interceptor, which is the other one that I played. Now, it's pretty squishy. It's an agility-based suit, but I really found it to be quite fun. Now, playing it traditionally like a cover shooter just does not work. Instead, you want to be dodging around the place a lot, meleeing people, which kind of spreads a dot effect, and then mixing in your abilities, and it is really fun. So yeah, I found both the Storm and the Interceptor to be quite a bit of fun to play. As for the Ranger, well, it really does prove to me that if you're playing this game and it's just more of a traditional third-person shooter character with, a few grenades and stuff, it's just not that interesting. Really, it fell below par to, say, Mass Effect Andromeda. So for me, it's like, use the more far-out mechs with the, greater mobility and more, and just more abilities. That seems to be a lot more fun. So overall, I would say that the combat is a mixed bag, and look, BioWare are not very experienced as a team when it comes to this type of gameplay. Comparisons to Warframe and to Destiny are going to be drawn based on the setup of this game, and broadly, I don't think they're that favourable unless the Iron Man fantasy is a particularly large selling point to you. So the next component of the free play mode was the various events. I think I did 2 of these, and basically they felt like worse versions of the Destiny 2 public events. They just weren't that interesting mechanically, and the pacing didn't really feel as tight. They also have very long spawn times, and that made the world feel very empty and lifeless, and overall it was just repetitive and not that interesting. Now, the VIP demo shipped with 3 different missions and a dungeon. The dungeon was actually quite fun, especially because I was using the Storm Javelin, which I really liked, and I was in a team with people who broadly were playing together, and I would say that It was good, but not exceptional. I think the baseline experience is pretty average from a gameplay perspective, to be honest, but yeah, it does have strong visuals and a cool fantasy. Now, sadly for me, the demo got stuck on an infinite loading screen just before the boss of the dungeon, so I did not get to play that. However, the friends of mine who have played it said that it was quite good and that it managed to make good use of the flight mechanics with the boss. Now, if done right, then that does have the potential to make the boss fights quite a bit more interesting than in other similar games. So that could be a good strong point. Now, the other two missions that I did, they were fine. Narratively, there wasn't really that much there, but it's kind of hard to tell. We were kind of thrown into the midpoint of the game, so it's just not really too fair to judge the narrative, I think. Overall, the missions were okay, but they were nothing special. And really, that's the demo, but that's not really where my thoughts end. When I think of the gameplay, well, right now, the flying is a cool gimmick, but the shooting is worse than Destiny and Warframe, and the movement feels overly rigid, I would say, in the non-interceptor javelins. Now, there is a lot of potential, I think, in this game for end-game co-op gameplay because of the ability combos. So they're separated into primers and, I think, triggers. It's basically the Mass Effect Andromeda system, so you could use an ice primer on an enemy, and then an ally could unleash an elemental combo on them that would deal really massive damage. Now, that means that I think people who play in a coordinated group, with all their abilities selected with the other people's in mind, that could actually lead to really good gameplay that really does support team play, and I think would actually feel really rewarding. So there's potential there. Now, narratively, I'm a bit worried. I personally don't suspect there'll be that much there. Gotta admit, I'm not massively gripped by the overall concept and what I've seen so far. It kind of just does feel like a big hub-based live service loot shooter. Unless they do something really surprising with the narrative, I think there's just a layer of cynicism about the structure of the game that will be hard to break through, especially since the bread and butter of their combat mechanics are kind of average, and really it's coming from developers really for whom nobody really wanted them to make a game like this. I mean, what do BioWare fans want? They want narrative-driven RPGs. What is this? It's mostly hard to tell, but it kind of does just feel like it's a flashy loot shooter that maybe just doesn't have gameplay mechanics that are as consistently strong as the other ones on the market. So ultimately, I think, when you structure your game off a pre-established model, you're going to draw more scrutiny and more comparisons, and that is what is happening to Anthem. The other thing that I worry about is the quantity of content. The map actually didn't look that big, and from what I can see, it seems to mostly be a very similar biome. Now, I could be totally wrong on this. It could turn out there's another area or something like that, but just from looking at the world map, it just doesn't seem massively varied, not as much as, say, Destiny's multiple planets that all have their own distinct visual look and feel. So there you go. So far, things are looking quite average. Now, if this had have been a free beta, then I would have been a lot more lenient. But the thing is, EA, you asked people for money for this. Now, the second you do that, then you're not just having people testing your software, you're having people play your product. And that does require critics like me to cut you a lot less slack. This should have been a free public stress test that happened before the VIP demo, is pretty much my thoughts. So there you go. I'm not entirely against this game, and if I hear good things about it in the weeks after launch, I probably will start playing it again. Of course, I have Origin Access Premium, so technically I already have the game anyway. There absolutely is potential for the future content to make good use of their flying system, and there absolutely is potential for a lot of depth in their spellcasting and their teamwork. Those things could be massive selling points for this game, but right now, based on what we've played in this demo, it's quite hard to tell. And then as a final note, if you don't have a good PC, I'm not really sure what to say to you. This game struggled for me at 3440 by 1440, but that was on a 2080 Ti. Now, perhaps this is just an older build that does not run well, and that a combination of new drivers and launch day patch optimizations will save it, but for now, all I can say is don't pre-order, definitely wait and see what happens. So there you go, that's my thoughts on this game. I'm in the odd position of I'm not massively confident about it, but I'm kind of worried that if this game doesn't do well, that it will be very bad for BioWare, and BioWare going down would be massively worrying to me because I'd like more Dragon Age and Mass Effect, especially Mass Effect, and I would wonder if this game not really doing that well would hurt the chances of getting a game like that. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, I suppose. It's hard not to be cynical about this game because its whole model is so clearly based off the live service model that Destiny and other games have. I mean, yeah, it's challenging. Anyway, there you go. That is my thoughts on the whole Anthem situation, as well as the Anthem, gameplay that I've actually played. If you played the VIP demo, let me know. If you haven't played it, still let me know what you think about the overall situation. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'll catch you next time.